When I'm out photographing, I never try and hide who I am or what I'm doing. I have quite a big camera. I have a flash gun on the camera. I just wander around and photograph who I see. When I started in photography, black and white was the dominant medium. And I think it must have been when I was 13 or 14 when I first got the serious photography bug. After I left college, I moved about 3 to 4 years later to a small town called Hebden Bridge, which lies between Bradford and Manchester. And in particular, I looked at things like small nonconformist chapels, very slowly and quietly closing down. And I picked these out as being a way of looking at very traditional aspects of life in England at the time. I came from a very middle-class background, so I think the idea of connecting with a community in a different way to what you have from suburban Surrey was such a contrast to me, and therefore it was very appealing. This was an inaugural banquet for the new mayor of Todmorden. You knew that the best opportunity, photographic opportunity that was this few minutes where people would charge for the banquet. And of course I'd be ready and waiting for the shot. And here you can just see as I've gone along, I've suddenly got everything where it just falls into place and all the hands coming in. And I suppose the thing that makes this is this guy carrying a pork pie in a cupped hand, and the awkwardness of the cluster of people on the left as a woman tries to get out and the other woman tries to come in. So it's these little details which show the sort of real feeling and sense of trying to grab food from a banquet. Later on, I decided that I would start shooting in colour and go up a format. And when I started doing colour in '82, I never did black and white again. It was at the time that Mrs. Thatcher had just started and become Prime Minister, and she was telling us what a great country we were again. So I liked this idea of picking out very run-down town or seaside resort near to Liverpool and showing how the whole fabric of the country had gone into disarray and was falling apart. And yet, of course, normal life goes on. So in front of these backdrops of litter and of decay, I would put these families going on their days out, enjoying themselves. And what I found interesting, of course, was the juxtaposition between the foreground people and the background and things falling apart. Of course, the most productive days were the busiest days, where there'd be more litter, there'd be more people. This meant I had in front of me all these scenes of chaos and queues and people very desperate to get a burger and a drink. And it just meant that I had access to that sort of point of vulnerability that I'm always looking for to sort of show the poignancy of what's happening in society. In the mid-'80s, I did a whole series of photographs about British people going to France to buy very cheap beer and duty-free items. This is Ocean Hypermarket in Boulogne. There was such demand for beer that sometimes it would actually run out. So people would literally be quite desperate to make sure that their trolley would be full before they got to the checkout. You can see here I'm wandering around, and then suddenly this woman comes along and pulls out the Stella Artois, and I like the expression on her face, a mixture of sort of despotism and heroicism. She's so desperate to get hold of a beer, it saved her life by grabbing it. You can see it's slightly off tilt, and this is just to give an emphasis of the disorder and the dysfunctional nature of being in a hypermarket when it's completely chaotic. I think it's important now to look at aspects like the wealth of the Western world rather than just the problems that you find in the Third World, and indeed wars and famines and such subjects, which are more traditional subjects for photographers. But I'm a very big hypocrite insofar that I'm making things and objects which become part of the thing that if you read my photographs carefully, I'm preaching against. So I love the fact that my work is surrounded by hypocrisy and prejudice and all these things that people don't expect photographers to be pursuing. This is from the project From A to B, which looked at how people had a relationship with their cars and how couples argue when they're driving. So this couple came forward and volunteered to be photographed. So I've got the guy to look at me, to stare at me, and I've asked the woman to look straight forward and to look pretty miserable, because the whole point of this couple is that we know that they argue when they're driving, which is a very common trait, because even Susie and I might argue when we're driving, because Susie's a terrible map reader. You know, there are certain things that men are good at. Map reading and barbecuing. The idea of boring is really fascinating, and in the world where we're given more and more distractions, more and more things to look at and to keep our attention scanned, which is getting less and less, the idea of something being boring for the sake of it is very appealing to me. This was when I was shooting the Bored Couple project, and I was looking particularly for couples who are appearing to be bored with each other. And the idea behind this was this notion of what a bunch of lies photographs are, because we look at couples, we assume they may be bored, but we don't know if they are at all. Part of the motive for this is to challenge the idea of what photographers say about the photographs, to make a very provocative statement about the photographs, which in fact I've tried to undermine by showing myself as appearing to be bored, but knowing full well that it's a big lie, that in fact I was very excited. Well, I'm interested in taking pictures, curating pictures, manipulating pictures. So part of my work is to explore this, not only with my own pictures, but with other people's pictures and more sort of populist forms of photography. So the idea of boring postcards just came along as a notion because it demonstrates very well how social attitudes have changed in the 30 to 40 years that most of these postcards were produced. In fact, the project took off enormously. And it's because of that that I decided to go to the town of Boring in Oregon in America. And I made a pilgrimage. So I photographed every single thing, building, street, house, shop counter in Boring, and then put together a huge album of 468 pictures, which I then called Boring Photographs. Well, tourism is the biggest industry in the world, so it seemed inevitable in one sense that I should look at this as a subject. And the great thing about tourism is the expectation of what a place will be like, and then the reality of how a place looks and feels are often very different. So the basic concept of this project is to explore the difference between expectation and reality. Because I travel a lot for my photography, over the years I'd noticed that there was fantastic studios that would have quite incredible photographs. But of course you can't really go in and buy other people's photographs. So I decided to have my own portrait taken over a period of years. I sit in the photograph. I always insist on not smiling, although many of the photographers try and make you smile. I try and make my pose very similar in order to highlight the differences between the approaches and techniques that these studio photographers use. So in a sense, this project called Autoportrait became a celebration of the basic studio photograph throughout the world and the different ways in which people would do this. Digital, hand-coloured, coloured, black and white, kitsch, posh, all the different ways in which people would have their photographs taken. In 1995, I changed from using a 6x7 camera to a much smaller format, 35mm, because I was very interested in exploring the idea of coming in a lot closer to the subject. And together with that, I had a ring flash. This is a flash where you have a flash on either side of the lens, so you therefore get very even lighting, almost like a portable studio. Over a period of about 3 to 4 years, I accumulated a lot of photographs in this style and then put them together into a project called Common Sense, which is where I made an installation of laser copies of these pictures. And because they were very cheap to do, it was shown in 43 different locations simultaneously. And this, therefore, was perfect conceptually for the type of work that it was. It was cheap, nasty, colourful, bright, and ubiquitous. This is from the project Think of England, and I did this in the late 90s, and it gave me an opportunity to look at England and to put into one set of pictures my confusion and ambiguity that I feel about England. England's a place that I both am very fond of and indeed am part of, but sometimes I get very annoyed by it. So this picture shows someone eating a bacon sandwich. If you're eating a bacon sandwich, the bacon rind is really annoying. And here it demonstrates someone's trying to get rid of the bacon by teasing it out with their teeth and trying to flick it off, but it's not always a very easy thing to do. If you look at it objectively, it's a very revolting photo, but also it's a very affectionate photo because it reminds us that we're all part of the sort of bigger scheme of things, and it's something like bacon rind that joins us all together. However superior we may feel, or indeed inferior, we still have the same problems with bacon rind. Even the Queen would have a problem with the bacon rind. Although perhaps she has someone cut it off for her.